I think there are at least 3 or 4 levels upon which fear works. We can talk about phobia. People who have phobias about spiders or claustrophobia, agoraphobia, all that kind of stuff, which I think is probably treatable, and it is proving treatable. Then there's these sort of physical fears, the anxiety about being murdered in your bed, the anxiety about lingering at the intersection of 42nd Street and 8th Avenue for too long by night, you know, the simple physical fear that there are people out there who are maniacs, and many of them have access to handguns and machetes. And then there's another fear, and this is the kind of fear that I'm most interested in, which is essentially an existential fear. The fact that we are born against our will into a condition which confuses us completely. We're born into a system which starts to fail horribly early, and begins to run down and play all kinds of tricks on us. I mean, I'm still scared of being murdered in my bed. What sensible person isn't? I don't like airplanes very much. I don't like elevators very much. I don't like rabid dogs at all. But those are not hugely important fears, it seems to me.
Hello? Hello? Oh, hi, it's Clive live. Clive, it's Commander Rick again. A friend in control faxed me up your new book, Magica. It's a real departure for you. You've left behind the splatterpunk trappings, and there isn't as much fear in the book as I feared.
You know, fear has never been a terribly interesting thing to want to create in a piece of fiction or evoke in a reader. Going way back to the Books of Blood now, going back to the first horror fiction that I wrote, I don't think that these were stories which primarily evoked fear in the readers. I think they evoked disgust once in a while. I think they evoked distress. I think they disturbed sometimes. I think they aroused sometimes. I'm using these judgments because from fan letters. I mean, very seldom do I get a fan letter that says, "Boy, you scared the bejesus out of me." It tends to be that fans enjoyed the material because it blew their minds. It took their consciousness into a place that they did not expect horror fiction to take them to. And so, even when I was writing quote-unquote horror fiction, the effect was not so much, as I say, scaring the bejesus out of people, but arousing a whole bunch of ambiguous, even paradoxical feelings in them. Fear isn't a terribly interesting emotion, I don't think, even if it's an emotion, a response maybe. It can make you feel giddy for a short while. It can raise the hackles on the back of your neck. It can give you goosebumps. I don't find it terribly educative, or it doesn't enlighten me terribly, unless it's associated with something more complex. It can be a small part of a response, but if it's all the response, then I'm not terribly interested.
But you still use fear as a motivation for some of the characters in the Magica. Yeah, I mean, you haven't abandoned it completely.
I think where I use fear constructively, if you like, is in the villains, in the bad guys. The bad guys tend to be fearful. The bad guys, and this isn't just true of a Magica, I think when I strip away the onion skins around many of the villains in my fiction, I very often get to a small, fearful little core. Actually, onions don't have cores, but maybe that's part of the point. I mean, you just keep stripping until there's nothing left. But the more you get to the center of the villains, the forces for evil in my books, the more you come to people whose evil is based upon weakness and mental frailty and nervousness and fear. And I think that that's generally true. Though I thoroughly enjoy fiction that evokes evil as some kind of massive demoniacal force. I mean, I love The Exorcist, I love Silence of the Lambs. I don't believe that's the way it is in life. I think the people that I have encountered in my life who came close to being evil, or on one or two occasions were evil, were people who were finally extremely weak and extremely terrified and in need of healing.
That's interesting. You've written books, painted your own covers, directed films, and inspired a whole host of comic books. Where does fear work best, or does it work well in any medium?
It's part of my philosophy, if you like, to treat the media that I work in, whether it be painting or an illustration on the one hand, or writing or movie making, is completely different things which I can do uniquely. In other words, there are some ideas which seem to suit books. I mean, a magic of the film, I'm not so sure. It's a book, that's what it should be. I've just finished a screenplay for Universal, which we'll make next year, and I can't imagine it as a book. I can't imagine it as a painting. I certainly put images on the canvas, on a piece of paper, which have no cinematic or literary correlation. In other words, there are horses for courses. You know, you find the things that work. Now, going back to the earlier part of your question, fear, suspense seem to me to work best in cinema. I mean, you hold your breath best in cinema. Cinema has that wonderful manipulative power. What literature does best, I think, is open your soul to the possibility of endless panoramas and not limit you, because really the panoramas in front of you are as big as your imagination. They're not as big as ILM's special effects team.
Thanks, Clive. Clive brings up an interesting point. Nancy, how much time do I have before they jam me? Well, try and stretch it. Clive talked about the difference between fear on the page or on the silver screen. Last week, I talked to Geoff Ryman about his book, Was. Geoff had some fascinating insights into fear and the Wizard of Oz. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my.
The thing that's interesting is that the first Oz book was written to set children free. It's in the introduction. Children don't need fearsome morality. And the book tries to tell an entire story without fear. If you read the novel The Wizard of Oz, it is bending over backwards not to frighten the children. They're told right at the beginning that there's been a kiss on Dorothy's forehead, which means nothing can hurt her. So they know they're going to have this wonderful adventure where no harm can come. And so they go through this. The Wicked Witch only is on one page. And he almost manages to do it. And interestingly enough, the book was, it was not beloved, it was beloved by the children, it's sold to the children. But the series as a whole was despised by librarians. They wouldn't stock it in libraries.
Oh.
It was not respectable. The movie, however, is utterly respectable as a national icon, is like America's only great literary epic, in the sense of Gilgamesh or whatever. Because she's Hercules, you know, she goes down to the netherworld. She's Gilgamesh, she goes down to the netherworld. But I think it's respectable because of that awful veneer in the movie of, you know, don't leave home, stay in place, do as you're told, be a good little girl. You know, I won't leave home ever, ever again. Ugh. You know, you'll have to, kid, it's the Depression. And that sort of morality, and also the vast amounts of fear in the movie version, are what make it respectable. It's far more respectable to terrify people than to try not to. And it's because fear is socially controlling.
Fear is a powerful weapon. It's been used by police, soldiers, dictators, and vice principals. Whole religions are based on fear. Fear kept communism in power for decades. When the people overcame their fear, whole governments fell like that. The people discovered they had nothing to fear but fear itself. Overcome that, and you'll never be afraid of anything, not even bungee jumping. Next week on Second Nature, can tight underwear cause health problems in men? A new study says it depends on how many pairs they eat.
Computers are everywhere.